The biting wind howled across a desolate continent, a vast expanse shrouded in ice and unforgiving wilderness. This was Europe, not the patchwork of nations we know today, but a land held captive by the relentless grip of the last glacial maximum. Great ice sheets, miles thick, scoured the northern lands, pushing life southward, compacting ecosystems and forcing all creatures, including our distant ancestors, into a desperate struggle for survival. The air itself was a weapon carrying the scent of snow and the promise of endless cold. Majestic woolly mammoths, shaggy rhinoceroses, and formidable cave bears roamed these frozen steppes and sparse tundra, their existence a testament to nature's brute power. And amidst them, tiny specks against a monumental backdrop, were the early humans. Neanderthals stocky and resilient, their minds honed by generations of harsh living, and later the first waves of modern humans, Homo sapiens, with their emerging complexities of thought and culture. This was a world of profound scarcity where every calorie counted and every day was a negotiation with oblivion. Resources were precious beyond measure. A successful hunt meant the difference between life and agonizing starvation. Shelters, often shallow caves or rock overhangs, offered only a tenuous refuge against the elements. The concept of home was fluid, defined by the seasonal migrations of prey and the ever-present need for warmth and sustenance. They lived in small, tight-knit bands, their survival utterly dependent on cooperation, cunning, and an intimate understanding of their brutal environment. Their lives, though seemingly simple to our modern eyes, were rich with unspoken traditions, evolving social structures, and the raw, unvarnished imperative to endure. Yet lurking beneath the frozen soils in the hidden chambers of ancient caves and within the fragmented bones left behind by these enigmatic people lies a truth far more disturbing than the mere struggle against nature. It is a truth that challenges our comforting narratives of human progress and reveals a darker, more primal facet of our shared past. For within the archaeological record of Ice Age Europe, scattered across thousands of millennia, are the chilling, undeniable traces of an act that to us represents the ultimate taboo: cannibalism. These were not the sensationalized, savage caricatures of popular imagination, but the pragmatic, sometimes ritualistic, sometimes desperate choices made by our ancestors to survive, to mourn, or perhaps to assert dominance in a world that offered no quarter. The whispers from the deep past are not of monstrous tribes, but of human beings pushed to the absolute limits of existence, capable of both profound ingenuity and acts of unimaginable horror, forever etched into the very bones they left behind. The story begins not with a single shocking discovery, but with a painstaking accumulation of evidence, piece by piece, bone by bone, unearthed by generations of dedicated archaeologists. For decades, the notion of cannibalism among early humans was often dismissed or explained away as post-mortem defleshing for burial rites or the work of scavenging animals. The idea was too confronting, too challenging to the comfortable linearity of human evolution. But as techniques improved and the understanding of taphonomy, the study of how organisms decay and become fossilized deepened. The patterns became unmistakable. Cut marks, spiral fractures, evidence of marrow extraction, and the deliberate shaping of bone into tools began to tell a consistent, unsettling tale that transcended mere scavenging. One of the earliest and most extensively studied sites to challenge these comforting assumptions was Krapina in Croatia. Here in a rock shelter nestled in the Zagorje Hills lay the remains of dozens of Neanderthals dating back approximately 130,000 years. Discovered in the late 19th century, the site yielded an unprecedented trove of Neanderthal fossils. But it was the condition of these bones that truly captivated and disturbed researchers. Many bore peculiar marks, long linear incisions consistent with stone tool use similar to those found on animal bones processed for meat. Some long bones were shattered, indicative of deliberate breaking to access the marrow within. Others showed evidence of burning. The remains were fragmented, disarticulated, and intermingled, suggesting a chaotic and intense processing of bodies. For a long time, the interpretation of Krapina was hotly debated. Were these cut marks evidence of ritual, defleshing a way to prepare bodies for secondary burial, or perhaps to cleanse the bones of flesh before transporting them? Or did they speak to a more gruesome practice? The arguments for cannibalism gained significant ground as forensic analysis advanced. Dr. Eric Trinkos, a leading paleoanthropologist, observed that the patterns of cut marks and breakage at Krapina were remarkably similar to those found on butchered animal remains from other Neanderthal sites, patterns unequivocally linked to consumption. The burning, too, was consistent with cooking. It suggested that the Neanderthals at Krapina were not merely stripping flesh from bones for ritualistic purposes. They were processing bodies in a manner identical to how they processed their animal prey. This wasn't just about preparing for a spiritual journey. It was about sustenance, about extracting every possible nutrient from what was available. The implications of Krapina were profound. It suggested that cannibalism, whether driven by survival or ritual, was a part of the Neanderthal behavioral repertoire, a stark reminder of the extreme pressures these resilient colonies faced. Their lives were a constant dance on the edge of the precipice, and in such a world, no resource, not even the remains of their own kind, could be entirely off-limits. The question shifted from if it happened to why and how often. Was it an act of desperation, a last resort during periods of severe famine? Or was there a deeper, more symbolic meaning attached to the consumption of their dead? The Krapina site, with its enigmatic bone fragments and haunting marks, laid the groundwork for further, even more compelling discoveries that would definitively answer some of these questions while simultaneously raising new, unsettling ones. The veil was beginning to lift on the truly challenging aspects of humanity's prehistoric past, revealing a world far more complex and brutal than previously imagined. If Krapina whispered the unsettling truth, the ancient caves of Atapuerca in northern Spain shouted it across the eons. This extraordinary archaeological complex, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, holds a staggering record of hominin occupation stretching back well over 1 million years. Within its labyrinthine passages, different layers tell distinct stories of various human species, but 2 sites in particular speak volumes about the practice of cannibalism: Grandolina and Cima de los Huesos. It is at Grandolina, specifically in a layer known as TD6, that some of the earliest and most unequivocal evidence for cannibalism in Europe, perhaps even in the world, was unearthed. Here archaeologists discovered the fossilized remains of Homo antecessor, a hominin species that lived approximately 800,000 to 1.2 million years ago. These aren't Neanderthals or modern humans, but an even older, more enigmatic branch of our family tree once thought to be a direct ancestor to both. The bones found at Grandolina belong to at least 11 individuals, ranging from children as young as 2 or 3 years old to adolescents. What immediately struck researchers was the condition of these remains. Just like at Krapina, these bones were littered with cut marks, fine linear incisions made by stone tools. But here the marks were more numerous, more systematic, and found on virtually all parts of the skeleton, including the crania, mandibles, and vertebrae. There were also percussion marks indicating forceful blows used to break bones specifically to access the nutrient-rich marrow inside. The evidence went beyond mere defleshing. The patterns of butchery on the Homo antecessor bones were indistinguishable from those found on the bones of red deer, horses, and other animals that these hominins routinely hunted and consumed for food. They were processed in precisely the same way. What made the Grandolina discovery so compelling was not just the abundance of the marks, but their context. The bones were found mixed with animal remains and stone tools within the refuse heaps of what appeared to be a living site. There was no evidence to suggest a ritualistic burial, nor were the remains those of a single isolated event. Instead, it pointed to a repeated habitual practice. The age profile of the victims, predominantly children and adolescents, further solidified the interpretation of nutritional cannibalism. It suggested that the weakest members of rival or even their own groups might have been targeted perhaps for convenience or due to the sheer desperation of resource scarcity. It's a chilling thought our ancestors, long before they developed complex language or sophisticated social structures, were already engaging in this most extreme form of resource acquisition. The team at Atapuerca, led by paleoanthropologists José María Bermúdez de Castro and Juan Luis Arzuaga, meticulously analyzed every fragment. Their conclusions were stark. The Homo antecessor individuals at Grandolina had been dismembered, defleshed, and consumed. This was not a symbolic act, but a pragmatic one. It painted a picture of early human life in Europe as incredibly precarious, where the line between survival and extinction was razor thin, and where every potential food source, even human flesh, was evaluated against the gnawing pangs of hunger. Just a short distance away, within the same Atapuerca complex, lies the Cima de los Huesos, or Pit of Bones. This deep shaft has yielded the largest collection of hominin fossils ever found, belonging to at least 28 individuals of an early Neanderthal lineage, Homo heidelbergensis, dating back roughly 430,000 years. While Cima de los Huesos is largely interpreted as an intentional accumulation of bodies, perhaps an early form of funerary practice, it underscores the complex and varied ways early hominins interacted with their dead. The absence of clear butchery marks here in stark contrast to Grandolina further strengthens the case for cannibalism at the latter site, demonstrating that hominins could treat their dead differently when the intent was not consumption. The evidence from Atapuerca, particularly Grandolina, fundamentally reshaped our understanding of early human behavior. It pushed the timeline of cannibalism back hundreds of thousands of years, suggesting it wasn't an isolated phenomenon among late Neanderthals or early modern humans, but a deep-rooted, albeit perhaps infrequent aspect of hominin survival strategies in Europe. It forces us to confront the reality that for much of our evolutionary history, our ancestors lived in a world where the boundaries of what was edible were vastly different from our own. They were driven by the most fundamental of instincts, and in the unforgiving landscape of Ice Age Europe, those instincts sometimes led to acts that still resonate with a profound, unsettling power. The stage was set for an even clearer and perhaps more disturbing picture to emerge with the arrival of modern humans. If the ancient hominins of Atapuerca revealed a pragmatic, almost clinical approach to consuming their own kind, the later evidence from Gough's Cave in Somerset, England, paints an even more chilling and complex picture, specifically involving our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens. This limestone cave, nestled in the dramatic Cheddar Gorge, has been a treasure trove of archaeological finds, particularly from the Magdalenian period, roughly 14,700 years ago, towards the very end of the last ice age. Here, amidst the bones of reindeer horses and Arctic foxes, lay the fragmented remains of human beings. Not just a few, but enough to constitute a small group. What the archaeologists uncovered at Gough's Cave was not merely evidence of defleshing, but a systematic and thorough processing of human remains that pushed the boundaries of known prehistoric behaviors. The bones belonging to at least 6 individuals, including 2 adolescents and a child, bore an unmistakable array of modifications. There were cut marks consistent with disarticulation and defleshing made with flint tools found across virtually every major bone, mirroring the precision seen in butchered animal carcasses. Beyond these, however, were signs of percussion marks where bones had been struck to break them open for marrow extraction. Long bones like femurs and tibias were splintered, revealing the meticulous effort to access the nutrient-rich core. Even the tiny bones of the feet and hands were not spared, indicating an extraordinary level of processing. But what truly sets Gough's Cave apart, elevating it from mere survival cannibalism, are the extraordinary modifications to the human crania. Several skulls had been meticulously cleaned of all flesh with delicate incision marks indicating precise defleshing. Then, with incredible skill and patience, their vaults had been carefully modified to create cups or bowls. The edges were remarkably smooth, deliberately broken, or trimmed to form concave vessels. These were not random breaks, but intentional shaping suggesting a specific purpose beyond simply accessing the brain. This discovery, confirmed by rigorous analysis and comparison with animal butchery patterns, offered compelling proof that the humans at Gough's Cave were not just consuming their dead for sustenance, but were engaging in a highly ritualized practice. The implications were profound. While nutritional stress in the harsh environment of late Ice Age Europe cannot be entirely ruled out as a contributing factor, the extreme care taken in defleshing the complete processing of even the smallest bones, and especially the manufacture of skull cups, strongly suggests a symbolic or ritualistic component. These weren't just meals of last resort, they were acts imbued with meaning. Were these the remains of enemies consumed to absorb their strength or spirit? Or were they kin processed in a macabre funerary rite, perhaps as a way to mourn, remember, or incorporate the deceased into the living? The precise motivations remain speculative, but the evidence demands a deeper consideration than simple hunger. The Gough's Cave findings force us to confront the uncomfortable reality that even among early modern humans, individuals who created exquisite cave art, sophisticated tools, and complex social structures, the boundaries of acceptable behavior in the face of extreme circumstances or perhaps profound belief systems extended to consuming and even utilizing the remains of their own kind. It challenges the simplistic notion of a linear progression from primitive savagery to enlightened humanity. Instead, it suggests a fluidity in human behavior dictated by environmental pressures, cultural beliefs, and the sheer tenacity of the will to survive. The individuals of Gough's Cave, whose skeletal remains tell such a stark tale, were not so different from us in their fundamental humanity, yet their responses to the world were shaped by a reality that is almost unfathomable today. Their bones, meticulously analyzed, continue to resonate with a haunting echo from a time when the world was vast, cold, and utterly unforgiving, forcing humanity to adapt in ways we can barely comprehend. The archaeological lens, free from moral judgment, simply presents the facts, leaving us to grapple with the deeper why. The skeletal evidence from Crapina Atapuerca and Gough's Cave paints a stark picture. Cannibalism was an undeniable, if likely infrequent, part of life for various hominin species during the European Ice Age. But the mere fact of its existence raises a more profound, more unsettling question. Why? What drove these ancient people to engage in an act that remains one of humanity's most deeply ingrained taboos? The motivations are rarely singular and often overlap a complex tapestry woven from necessity, belief, and the sheer desperation of a hostile world. One of the most compelling and frequently cited explanations is survival cannibalism, driven by extreme nutritional stress. Imagine the reality of the Ice Age, vast glaciers locking away water landscapes transformed into frozen tundras or sparse steppes, and megafauna like mammoths and woolly rhinos, while abundant in biomass, were formidable and dangerous to hunt. Periods of intense cold, extended winters, or a sudden collapse in prey populations could lead to agonizing famine. In such circumstances, every calorie, every gram of protein became critical. The extensive processing of bones seen at sites like Grandolina and Crapina, the meticulous scraping of meat, the shattering of long bones for marrow, the crushing of spongy bone for fats, aligns perfectly with the behavior of people driven by acute hunger. When facing starvation, the distinctions between animal flesh and human flesh might have blurred, reduced to a desperate caloric equation. The youngest and weakest members of a group might have been the first to succumb to natural causes, or perhaps in the most dire circumstances been sacrificed their bodies, becoming a grim yet vital resource to ensure the survival of the remaining community. This isn't an act of malice, but one of brutal necessity, a testament to the sheer will to persist against overwhelming odds. However, the evidence from sites like Gough's Cave suggests that survival was not always the sole or even primary motivator. Here, the careful crafting of skull cups, the elaborate processing beyond mere sustenance points strongly towards ritualistic cannibalism. Such practices can take many forms. Endocannibalism, the consumption of members of one's own group or kin, often serves as a mourning rite, a way to internalize the deceased's spirit, to honor them, or to prevent their soul from wandering. By consuming parts of the body, the living might have believed they absorbed the deceased's qualities, wisdom, or strength, or simply kept them eternally connected to the tribe. While specific evidence for this is hard to prove without written records, the respectful, albeit macabre, treatment of the bones at Gough's Cave, particularly the skull cups, hints at a deeply symbolic act rather than just a pragmatic meal. Conversely, exocannibalism, the consumption of individuals from rival groups or enemies, could have been a means of expressing dominance, absorbing the vanquished's power, or inflicting ultimate humiliation. Imagine a small band encountering a hostile group in the vast wilderness. The consumption of their fallen adversaries could serve as a powerful deterrent, a message etched in bone that this territory was fiercely defended. While this is also difficult to ascertain directly from skeletal remains, the psychological impact of such an act would have been immense. The very idea of consuming an enemy's heart or brain is found in many historical and ethnographic accounts of warfare, often linked to the belief in acquiring their courage or intellect. Beyond direct consumption, the acts observed could also be related to post-mortem defleshing for secondary burial or other mortuary practices. Some cultures historically cleaned bones to prepare them for reburial, transport, or display. However, the presence of percussion marks and the deliberate breaking for marrow extraction at many Ice Age sites often distinguishes these acts from mere defleshing for ritualistic cleansing. The evidence at Gough's Cave for complete processing and the creation of skull cups pushes it far beyond simple funerary defleshing. The challenge for archaeologists lies in discerning the precise intent. The same cut marks might be present whether someone was consumed for food or processed for ritual. Distinguishing between a desperate act of survival and a profound symbolic gesture requires meticulous analysis of context-associated artifacts and the patterns of bone modification. It's a subtle dance between the tangible and the interpretive, where every fracture and every incision holds a potential clue to the innermost lives of people who left no written language. What is clear, however, is that our Ice Age ancestors were not monolithically savage or enlightened. They were complex beings responding to their environment with an array of behaviors, some of which seem alien to us now, but were perhaps utterly logical, even necessary for them. The very act of confronting these uncomfortable truths allows us to better understand the extraordinary resilience and adaptability that define the human story. The revelations from sites like Crepina Atapuerca and Gough's Cave compel us to reevaluate our understanding of humanity's deep past. They force us to step beyond idealized notions of primitive innocence or simplistic savagery, and instead gaze upon a reality far more nuanced, brutal, and profoundly human. The Ice Age was not merely a backdrop for early human existence. It was a relentless sculptor shaping behavior, societies, and the very instincts that allowed our ancestors to endure. In that unforgiving world, human groups were small, vulnerable enclaves, often numbering no more than a few dozen individuals. Their survival hinged on collective effort, the communal hunt, the shared knowledge of edible plants and safe shelters, the protection of the young and the old. The loss of even a single individual, let alone several, would have been a catastrophic blow to such a fragile community. Every death, therefore, carried an immense weight, a practical deficit in collective strength, and a profound emotional void. It is within this context of extreme environmental pressure and inherent vulnerability that the practice of cannibalism, however disturbing it may seem to us, becomes understandable, if not condonably acceptable, by modern standards. For our Ice Age ancestors, the line between life and death was blurred, constantly threatening to dissolve into oblivion. Acts that we today consider abhorrent might have been desperate measures to preserve the collective, to prolong existence for just a little longer. If a dying or deceased member of the group, or even a fallen enemy, could provide the energy necessary for the others to survive the brutal winter, to hunt another day to reproduce and carry on the lineage, then the choice, grim as it was, might have been clear. This understanding challenges our modern moral frameworks. We tend to project our contemporary ethics and sensibilities onto the past, often judging ancient behaviors through a lens of comfort and abundance that simply did not exist. The people of the Ice Age were not evil in our sense of the word. They were problem solvers driven by the most fundamental of biological imperatives. Their world demanded extreme adaptability, and their solutions, however stark, were products of their reality. They possessed complex cognitive abilities, evident in their tool-making, their eventual art, their intricate understanding of their environment. Yet these minds operated within a framework of survival dictated by constant scarcity. Furthermore, the existence of ritualistic cannibalism, as perhaps suggested by the Goths' cave skull cups, speaks to an emerging spiritual or symbolic dimension to their lives. These acts were not merely about nutrition, they were imbued with meaning, perhaps connected to beliefs about the soul power or the relationship between the living and the dead. This suggests a nascent capacity for abstract thought, for constructing narratives around profound experiences, even those as unsettling as the processing of human remains. It shows that even in the harshest environments, the human mind sought to impose order and meaning on its existence, creating rituals to navigate grief, fear, or triumph. Ultimately, these archaeological discoveries offer a profound reflection on the spectrum of human behavior and the extraordinary resilience of our species. They remind us that our journey from the Ice Age to the present has been one of continuous adaptation, not just technologically but socially and culturally. The taboos we hold sacred today are products of a long, often tumultuous evolutionary history. The shift away from routine cannibalism likely coincided with increasing resource reliability, larger social groups, and the development of more complex and empathetic moral codes. The very fact that such practices are almost universally abhorrent to modern humans is a testament to the immense cultural and ethical progress made over tens of thousands of years. The bones of Ice Age Europe, bearing their silent, unsettling testimony, are not just relics of a forgotten past. They are potent reminders of what it means to be human at the very edge of existence, of the depths to which survival instincts can drive us, and the long, arduous path that has led us to the world we inhabit today. They are an echo from a distant time, prompting us to ponder the remarkable journey of our species and the enduring mysteries of human nature. The study of the cannibal tribes of Ice Age Europe is not a quest for sensationalism, but a rigorous scientific endeavor to reconstruct the most challenging chapters of our evolutionary story. Each cut mark, each fracture, each precisely placed bone fragment is a data point meticulously analyzed by archaeologists, anthropologists, and forensic scientists. They piece together these ancient puzzles not to condemn or glorify, but to understand the full spectrum of human adaptation and behavior under circumstances almost unimaginable to us. The scientific consensus, built upon decades of painstaking excavation and cutting-edge analysis, is clear: cannibalism was a documented reality for various hominin groups, including our direct ancestors in Ice Age Europe. It was not a constant, pervasive practice, but rather an episodic one triggered by specific environmental pressures, cultural beliefs, or desperate circumstances. It reminds us that the pathway of human evolution was not a smooth, linear ascent to modernity, but a rugged, winding trail fraught with existential threats and demanding extraordinary, sometimes grim, measures for survival. These findings serve as a powerful testament to the sheer resilience of the human spirit. Despite relentless, cold, unpredictable food sources and constant danger from formidable predators, our ancestors not only survived but thrived for millennia. They developed intricate tool technologies, complex hunting strategies, and eventually profound artistic and symbolic expressions that laid the groundwork for all subsequent human civilization. The acts of cannibalism, when viewed through this lens, become a stark illustration of the deep-seated imperative to live to perpetuate the group and to overcome the seemingly insurmountable. What these bone fragments and altered skulls ultimately tell us is a story of deep time and radical change. They highlight the immense journey our species has undertaken, transforming from small, vulnerable bands struggling to exist in a frozen wilderness into a globally interconnected civilization. The very revulsion we feel towards cannibalism today is a product of that journey, a testament to the development of complex ethical systems, abundant resources, and social structures that have allowed us to move beyond such extreme measures for survival. Our modern moral landscape, built on principles of universal human dignity and the sanctity of life, stands in stark contrast to the desperate pragmatism of the Ice Age. Yet there is a profound connection across the vast chasm of time. The individuals whose bones tell these haunting tales were at their core driven by the same fundamental impulses that motivate us: the desire to protect their kin, to find sustenance, to understand their world, and to ensure the continuation of their lineage. Their choices, however alien, were rooted in a shared humanity that simply faced a world of vastly different constraints. As the glaciers retreated and the climate warmed, transforming the European landscape once more, so too did human societies evolve. New technologies, changing environments, and growing populations likely led to the gradual decline of cannibalistic practices. But the echoes remain preserved in the ancient caves and buried soils, offering a sober and vital reminder of where we came from. They stand as silent monuments to the unvarnished truth of our origins, urging us to look beyond our comfortable present and acknowledge the full, incredible, and sometimes terrifying story of human endurance. The deep past holds not just bones, but reflections of ourselves, challenging us to consider the enduring questions of survival, morality, and the very essence of what it means to be human.